They humiliated the supposed cleaner, not knowing she was the CEO's mother. Don't forget to comment from which country you're watching us. That morning, no one paid attention when the older woman walked through the main entrance of the Altiora Global building in downtown Los Angeles. She carried a blue bucket and yellow gloves that made her role obvious. The new cleaning lady walked slowly, as if her knees reminded her of the years she'd lived, but her gaze was firm and observant. Her weathered hands held the mop with the same dignity with which she had raised her son. The wrinkles around her eyes told stories of early mornings working, silent sacrifices, and unconditional love, but no one stopped to read those lines of life. To everyone, she was just another invisible woman in the corporate machinery. The scent of disinfectant mixed with expensive perfume floating in the marble lobby. Catherine Martinez, 63 years old, took a deep breath and prepared for the most painful mission of her life, learning the truth about the world her son had built. If this story already touched your heart in this first minute, subscribe to the channel. Here you'll find stories that heal, inspire, and make you believe in human goodness again. The glass tower of Altiora Global rose like a monument to success. 30 floors of cutting-edge technology, modern offices, and employees who thought they owned the world. On the 30th floor, David Martinez, 36 years old, ran his empire from an office that seemed to float among the clouds of Los Angeles. But that morning, David wasn't reviewing financial reports. His eyes were fixed on the security screens showing every corner of the building, especially the lobby where an older woman had just arrived in her cleaning uniform. "Mom," he murmured quietly, adjusting the camera zoom. 3 months earlier, David had begun hearing rumors, comments about the toxic environment in some departments, whispered complaints about discrimination and mistreatment. As CEO, he had implemented inclusion policies, had spoken about respect and values. But words on paper don't always translate into real actions. "I want to see with my own eyes how they treat people when they think no one is watching," he had told his mother during a family dinner. Catherine had accepted without hesitation. "Son, I cleaned offices for years before you were born. I know what it's like to be invisible to some and sustenance to others." Now she was there, in the heart of the company, dressed in the blue uniform she had obtained through the Human Resources Department under a false identity. Catherine Martinez had become Catherine Morales, widow, with cleaning experience, needing the job. Supervisor Lewis Miller approached her with a condescending smile. He was a middle-aged man, prominent belly and despotic attitude. "You must be the new one," he said without even looking at her face. "I hope you can keep up with the pace. We don't keep anyone here who's not useful." Catherine nodded silently. Her eyes caught every detail, the way Lewis examined her from head to toe, the paternalistic tone, the complete lack of basic courtesy. "Your area will be from the 15th to the 25th floor, 9 floors, the bathrooms, the offices, the hallways, everything. And I don't want to hear complaints that you can't handle the work because of your age." The words fell like silent punches. Catherine had led work teams, had made important decisions, had raised a son who was now CEO of a multinational company. But there, in that moment, she was just the new one they hoped could keep up the pace. "Understood?" Louis insisted, tapping his clipboard with his pen. "Yes, sir," Catherine responded with a soft but firm voice. In the elevator heading to the 15th floor, Catherine closed her eyes. The elevator rose slowly, but she felt like she was descending into a world she knew too well. A world where a person's value was measured by their uniform, their age, their social position. The elevator's ding pulled her from her thoughts. The doors opened, revealing a carpeted hallway, glass walls, and modern offices. Young employees walked hurriedly, talking on phones, carrying laptops, living their important lives. Catherine pushed her cleaning cart down the hallway. The sound of wheels on marble was the only thing announcing her presence. No one looked at her. No one greeted her. It was as if she were a ghost that materialized only to clean up their messes. In the accounting office, a group of employees was laughing loudly. Catherine approached discreetly to clean the nearby windows. "Did you see the new cleaning lady?" said a female voice. "She looks like she already has one foot in the grave." The laughter intensified. Catherine kept cleaning, but each word stuck in her chest like a splinter. "Poor thing," commented another voice with false compassion. "She probably has to work because her children don't support her." More laughter. Catherine gripped the cloth in her hands, feeling her knuckles turn white. In his office on the 30th floor, David clenched his fists as he listened to every word through the audio system connected to the cameras. "Stay calm," he told himself. "Wait. Let them show who they really are." Catherine finished cleaning that area and headed toward the bathrooms. In the women's bathroom mirror, she saw herself reflected. A 63-year-old woman with gray hair pulled back in a ponytail, blue uniform, and yellow gloves. But in her eyes shone the same determination she had carried all her life. "Respect isn't bought with money," she told herself, remembering the words she always said to David when he was a child. "It's earned through example." At the end of the day, while gathering her things in the cleaning staff locker room, Louis Miller appeared again. "For your first day, you didn't do too badly," he said with the same condescending tone. "But tomorrow, I want you to finish an hour earlier. The employees complain that the cart noise distracts them." Catherine nodded. An hour earlier meant less time to do the same work, but she didn't protest. While waiting for the bus at the stop, Catherine felt the weight of the day. It wasn't just physical exhaustion. It was the weight of invisibility, of looks that went through her as if she didn't exist, of words that reduced her to a stereotype. Her phone vibrated. A message from David. "How was your day, Mom?" Catherine looked at the message for a long moment. She could tell him everything. She could ask him to end this charade. But she knew it was necessary to go all the way. "Everything fine, son. Tomorrow we continue." In his office, David saved the day's recordings. Every conversation, every mocking laugh, every gesture of contempt toward his mother. The woman who had sacrificed everything to give him opportunities. The woman who had worked double shifts to pay for his studies. The woman who had believed in him when no one else did. "Tomorrow will be another day," he murmured, knowing that what he was seeing was just the beginning. But what none of them knew was that every cruel word, every contemptuous gesture was being recorded by someone who would never forget. Could they imagine what would happen when they discovered the truth? The second day arrived with a fine rain that fogged the windows of the Altiora Global building. Catherine entered through the service door, as they had instructed her. "Cleaning people don't use the main entrance," Louis Miller had told her, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. In the cleaning staff locker room, Catherine met Martha, a woman of about 45 who had been working in the building for 5 years. "Good morning, Ms. Catherine," Martha greeted her while putting on her uniform. "How did they treat you yesterday?" "As expected," Catherine replied, buttoning her blue shirt. Martha sighed. "Here you learn to become invisible. It's the only way to survive. Some of those employees—" She shook her head. "They think because they make more money they're better people." Catherine remained silent, but recorded every word in her memory. "Yesterday I heard Miss Lucy from reception talking about you," Martha continued. "She was saying they should hire younger people, that old folks like us are no longer useful." Catherine's heart raced. Lucy Spencer, 28 years old, main receptionist. She had reviewed her file the night before. Communications degree, hired 2 years ago, excellent performance evaluations. On paper, a model employee. "Don't pay attention to her," Martha advised. "She talks a lot, but doesn't know anything about real life." Catherine began her day on the 18th floor. The marketing department buzzed with activity. Young creatives with headphones, designers with tablets, account executives talking on phones. A vibrant world where ideas became million-dollar campaigns. But when Catherine appeared with her cart, the conversation stopped. "Excuse me," said a young man of about 25, not bothering to remove his headphones. "Can you clean later? We're in an important meeting." Catherine looked around. There was no visible meeting, just employees at their desks, drinking coffee, checking social media. "Of course," she responded softly. "What time would be convenient?" The young man looked at her as if she had asked a stupid question. "I don't know." "When we're not working. Use common sense." His colleagues laughed. Catherine nodded and walked away with her cart, feeling the mocking stares on her back. On the 30th floor, David watched the scene through security cameras. His jaw was tense, his hands clenched into fists. He picked up the phone and dialed Human Resources. "Mark, this is David Martinez. I need you to review the policies for treating cleaning staff. I want a complete report on any complaints or incidents in the last 6 months." Mark Sullivan, HR Director, was surprised by the call. "Of course, Mr. Martinez. Is there a specific problem?" "I'm evaluating organizational culture. I want hard data." Meanwhile, Catherine had found refuge in the 19th floor bathroom. She needed a moment to process what she was experiencing. She sat on one of the rest area benches and breathed deeply. The door opened and 3 young women entered, employees from the sales department. They didn't notice Catherine, who remained hidden behind a column. "Did you see the new cleaning lady?" one of them asked while touching up her makeup in the mirror. "Yes, poor thing. She looks too old for this job," another responded. "I don't understand why they hire people so old," commented the third. "It's obvious they won't perform the same. It's almost cruel to make them work so hard." Catherine closed her eyes. The words weren't malicious, but they hurt just the same. Condescending compassion sometimes hurt more than direct cruelty. "My grandmother is the same age," continued one of them. "But she's at home, comfortable, watching her shows. I don't understand why this lady has to be here, cleaning up our messes." "She probably has ungrateful children who don't support her," another speculated. Catherine felt a pang in her chest. If they knew that her ungrateful son was the company's CEO, that he had a house in the best area of Los Angeles, that she had never lacked anything. But that wasn't the reality for many women her age. When the women left, Catherine remained seated for a few more minutes. She looked at her hands, those hands that had worked in all kinds of jobs to get David ahead. Hands that had cleaned real offices, not as part of an undercover investigation, but out of real necessity. The memory transported her 30 years back. David was 6 years old, and she worked nights cleaning a shopping center. There was no money for a babysitter, so sometimes she had to bring him with her. The boy would fall asleep in a chair while she mopped the endless hallways. "Mom, why do you have to work when everyone is sleeping?" he had asked her one night. "Because that's how we build our dreams, son. With honest work, no matter the time or place." Now, decades later, she was reliving that experience. But this time, she wasn't doing it out of economic necessity, but to understand a deeper need. The need to know if the world her son had helped build was a place where people like her were treated with dignity. The answer, so far, was discouraging. At noon, Catherine headed to the employee cafeteria on the 5th floor. It was a spacious, modern space with windows overlooking the city. The tables were occupied by groups of employees laughing, discussing projects, enjoying their breaks. Catherine took a tray and got in line. When her turn came, the cafeteria employee looked at her with annoyance. "Aren't you supposed to bring your own food?" she asked with a harsh tone. "I didn't know I couldn't buy here," Catherine replied calmly. "You can, but this food is expensive. Are you sure you can afford it?" The words resonated in the silence that had formed around them. Other employees turned to watch the scene. Catherine felt herself becoming the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. "Yes, I can afford it," she said with a firm voice. The cafeteria employee sighed dramatically and served her a plate of food with abrupt movements, as if she were doing her an enormous favor. Catherine paid and looked for a table. Most were occupied, and at the few available ones, she noticed how people looked away when she approached. Finally, she found a small table in a corner, by the window. While eating in silence, she heard fragments of conversations from nearby tables. Exciting projects, planned vacations, office problems that seemed tremendous but would be solved with a call or an email. She felt like a spectator of lives that unfolded in a world parallel to hers, a world where people worried about getting the best parking spot, not about getting work, where the biggest problem was deciding what to order at the trendy restaurant, not whether there would be enough money for transportation. "Excuse me?" A soft voice pulled her from her thoughts. It was a young woman of about 22, with a credential identifying her as an intern from the design department. "Can I ask you something?" Catherine nodded, preparing for another humiliation. "My grandmother also worked in cleaning her whole life," said the young woman with a genuine smile. "I just wanted to tell you that I really admire women like you. The work you do is very important." For the first time in 2 days, Catherine felt genuine warmth in her chest, a simple show of respect, of human recognition. "Thank you, dear," she responded with a smile. "My name is Andrea," the young woman introduced herself. "If you need anything, anything at all, don't hesitate to tell me." When Andrea walked away, Catherine felt that not everything was lost. In the midst of indifference and contempt, there were people capable of seeing beyond the uniform. But she also knew that one swallow doesn't make a summer, and that the following hours would show her much more than she would prefer to see. On the 30th floor, David had seen the entire lunch scene. Every contemptuous gesture, every sideways glance, every moment of his mother's loneliness. But he had also seen Andrea. And he wondered, in a company of 500 employees, how many Andreas were there? And how many people willing to humiliate a woman who was just trying to do her job with dignity? The third day began with a special meeting on the 20th floor. Robert Lewis, senior manager of the operations department, had called his team to review quarterly results. He was a 42-year-old man, expensive suit, Italian shoes, and an attitude that made it clear he considered himself very important. Catherine arrived early to the floor, as was her custom. She wanted to finish cleaning before the day's activities began, but when she pushed her cart toward the conference room, she encountered Robert preparing the presentation. "What are you doing here so early?" he asked with an irritated tone, without even turning to look at her. "I came to clean, sir. I wanted to finish before your meeting started." Robert turned around and looked her up and down with obvious contempt. "Can't you do this later? I need to concentrate and the noise distracts me." "Of course, sir. I'll come back later. And when you come back, be careful with the documents. There's confidential information here. We don't want people like you seeing things you shouldn't see." The words fell like a slap. People like you. Catherine felt the poisonous implication behind those words. It wasn't just about her work. It was about her social class, her age, her supposed lack of education. "I understand, sir," she responded with a controlled voice, although inside she felt a mixture of indignation and sadness. On the 30th floor, David had heard every word. His face had hardened with each contemptuous syllable from Robert. He picked up his phone and dialed his assistant's number. "Patricia, I need Robert Lewis's complete file. Everything. Evaluations, projects, complaints, everything you have. Any problem, Mr. Martinez?" "Just want to review some data," David responded, although he knew he had already made a decision about Robert's future at the company. Catherine headed to the elevator, but when the doors opened, she encountered a group of executives who clearly didn't expect to share the space with her. "Isn't there another elevator for service staff?" one of them asked loudly, addressing his colleagues as if Catherine weren't present. "I think they can use the freight elevator," another responded. "It's more appropriate." Catherine entered the elevator in silence. The men continued their conversation about the weekend football game, creating a bubble of normalcy that completely excluded her. When they reached the 15th floor, Catherine got out without saying a word. One of the men commented as the doors closed. "At least this one doesn't smell bad like the previous one." The words followed her down the hallway. It wasn't just the cruelty of the comment, but the casualness with which they had said it, as if discussing the personal hygiene of cleaning employees was a normal topic of conversation. In the 16th floor bathroom, Catherine allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw her mother, who had died 10 years earlier after a lifetime of domestic work. Her mother, who had cleaned other people's houses so her children could study. Her mother, who never complained, who never lost her dignity, who always kept her head high. "Mom," she whispered to the mirror, "how did you do it? How did you bear being treated like you were invisible?" The answer came in her own voice, reproducing the words her mother had told her so many times. "Dignified work has no age or social class, daughter. What matters is how you do it, not what others think of you." At noon, she decided to have lunch in the park near the building instead of facing the cafeteria again. She needed fresh air, needed to feel that she existed beyond the glass walls and contemptuous looks. On a bench under a tree, she unwrapped the sandwich she had prepared at home. It was simple, ham and cheese on sliced bread. But while eating it, she remembered family dinners with David, conversations about his dreams, the plans they had made together. "Will I ever be rich, Mom?" David had asked her when he was 12 years old. "I don't know if you'll be rich in money," Catherine had responded, "but I hope you'll be rich in values, that you never forget where you come from, that you always treat people with respect no matter what job they do." Now, while looking at the Altiora Global building rising imposingly in front of her, she wondered if her son had forgotten those conversations. Not because of his personal behavior, but because of the world he had created, a world where employees could humiliate other human beings with impunity. Back in the building, she went to the locker room to change her shoes, which had begun to hurt her feet. There she met Martha and 2 other cleaning employees, Rose and Hope. "How's your day going, Ms. Catherine?" Rose asked, a petite woman of about 50. "Surviving," Catherine responded with a forced smile. "Oh, we've all been there," Hope commented. "The first days are the worst. Later you learn not to listen, not to see, not to feel." "Is that the solution? Becoming insensitive?" "It's the only way," Martha said sadly. "Here we're like furniture, necessary but invisible. If you take every cruel comment personally, you go crazy." Catherine nodded, but inside she rebelled against that resignation. Was it fair that women like them had to develop emotional armor just to survive in their workplace? "Have you ever complained?" she asked. The 3 women exchanged glances. "Complain to whom?" Rose asked. "To human resources? They're on the executive side. To the supervisors? They're worse than the employees." "I complained once," Hope confessed in a low voice, "because a manager yelled at me in front of everyone for something that wasn't my fault. You know what happened? They told me I was too sensitive, that if I couldn't handle constructive feedback, maybe this job wasn't for me." Catherine's heart sank. They were trapped in a system that minimized them, that treated them like second-class citizens in their own workplace. In the afternoon, while cleaning the 22nd floor offices, she witnessed a scene that marked her deeply. Lewis Miller, her supervisor, was scolding a young cleaning employee for accidentally breaking a cup. "This comes out of your paycheck," he yelled at her, although the cup wasn't worth more than a few dollars. "We can't have clumsy people working here." The young woman, who couldn't have been more than 20 years old, cried silently while picking up the pieces. Catherine approached. "Excuse me, Mr. Miller. It was an accident. We all make mistakes." Louis turned toward her with fury. "Nobody asked for your opinion. You focus on your work and let me handle the staff. I was just trying to help." "Help? You've only been here 3 days. Don't get involved in things that don't concern you." The public humiliation in front of the young employee and several office workers who had approached to see the drama was devastating. Catherine felt the blood rush to her face, how adrenaline coursed through her veins. But she remained silent, because that was her mission. Observe, document, understand. In his office, David had seen the entire scene. His face was red with anger. Lewis Miller had just publicly humiliated his mother, the woman who had raised him, who had sacrificed everything for him, who had worked for years in similar jobs to give him opportunities. He picked up the phone and dialed security. "I need copies of all security camera recordings from the last 3 days, especially any interaction between cleaning staff and the rest of the employees." At the end of the day, Catherine sat on the bus back home. Her body ached, but her soul ached more. It wasn't just for her. It was for Martha, for Rose, for Hope, for the young woman who had broken the cup. It was for all the women who day after day endured humiliations for the simple fact of doing honest work. Her phone vibrated. A message from David. "How are you, Mom?" Catherine looked at the message for a long moment. She had so much to tell him, about casual cruelty, about systematic indifference, about a world where respect was a privilege reserved for a few. But she also had to tell him about Andrea, the young intern who had treated her with kindness, about the genuine smile of the afternoon shift cafeteria lady, about small gestures of humanity in the midst of so much coldness. "I'm learning a lot, son," she finally responded. "Tomorrow we continue." At home that night, while preparing chamomile tea, Catherine reflected on what she had experienced. It wasn't just an undercover investigation. It was a journey to the heart of inequality, a reminder that human dignity shouldn't be a luxury. But what Catherine didn't know was that the next day, her resistance would be tested in a way she never imagined, and that David, from his office on the 30th floor, was preparing something that would change everything forever. The fourth day dawned gray, as if the sky had decided to echo the atmosphere Catherine had been breathing. She arrived at the Altiora Global building with renewed determination. 3 days of observation had been enough to confirm her worst fears, but also to strengthen her resolve. In the locker room, she found Martha, who had swollen eyes from crying. "What happened?" Catherine asked, approaching with concern. "Yesterday, after you left, Lewis scolded me for defending the girl with the broken cup. He said if I kept getting into trouble, he was going to fire me." Martha wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I have 3 children, Ms. Catherine. I can't lose this job." Catherine felt a pang of guilt. Her intervention had had consequences for another person, but she also felt a dull rage growing in her chest. "It's not fair," she murmured. "Justice is a luxury we can't afford," Martha responded bitterly. That morning, Catherine began her routine on the 19th floor, where the sales department was located. The atmosphere was particularly tense. There was an important meeting with international clients, and all the employees were nervous. Robert Lewis walked through the hallways like a general inspecting the troops. When he saw Catherine cleaning near the conference room, he walked toward her with determined steps. "You again?" he said with a contemptuous tone. "Can't you do this at another time? We have important clients arriving in an hour." "I'll finish in 5 minutes, sir," Catherine responded calmly. No, this can't wait." Robert looked around, making sure other employees were listening. "Look, what's your name?" "Catherine Morales." "Mrs. Morales, we're going to have very important people here. People who move millions of dollars. We can't have interruptions." The word interruptions resonated like a slap. Catherine wasn't a person. She was an interruption. "I understand, sir. I'll withdraw." "And another thing," Robert added, raising his voice so others could hear. "When the clients come, stay away from this area. We don't want them to misinterpret our quality standards." The silence that followed was deafening. The employees who had heard exchanged uncomfortable glances. Some smiled nervously. No one said anything. Catherine nodded and walked away with her cart, but each step felt like lead. "We don't want them to misinterpret our quality standards." The words repeated in her mind like a poisonous echo. On the 30th floor, David watched the scene with clenched jaws. The moment had arrived. He couldn't stand one more second of seeing his mother humiliated by employees who thought they were superior because of the color of their tie or the floor where they had their desk. He picked up the phone and dialed Mark Sullivan, HR director. Mark, I need you to call an emergency meeting with all directors and managers. Main conference room, 25th floor, in 1 hour. All of them, Mr. Martinez. Is there a crisis? Yes, there's a crisis. A crisis of values. And it's time to resolve it. Meanwhile, Catherine had found refuge in the 17th floor bathroom. She needed a moment to process what she had just experienced. She sat in one of the rest area chairs and closed her eyes. Memories flooded her. Her own experience cleaning offices 30 years ago. The nights when she came home exhausted and hurt, not just physically, but emotionally. The cruel comments, the contemptuous looks, the constant feeling of being a second-class citizen. But she also remembered why she had done it. For David. To give him opportunities, so he could build a better world. And now she discovered that better world didn't exist yet. That despite all the advances, all the inclusion policies, all the speeches about respect and dignity, there was still a system that allowed people like Robert Lewis to humiliate people like her with impunity. Her phone vibrated. A text message from an unknown number. Special meeting in 30 minutes. Main conference room, 25th floor. All directors and managers must attend. Subject: Organizational Culture Evaluation. Catherine frowned. Why was she receiving that information? It was strange. 10 minutes later, she received another message from Louis Miller. Cleaning staff must be present to serve coffee at special meeting. Report to main conference room, 25th floor in 15 minutes. Catherine's heart raced. Something was happening. Something big. She went to the 25th floor, where she found other cleaning employees preparing the room. Martha was there, organizing cups and plates. "Do you know what this meeting is about?" Catherine asked her. "I have no idea." "But it must be important. Look how many people are arriving." Indeed, directors and managers from all departments were entering the room. Robert Lewis arrived with an air of importance, greeting his colleagues, adjusting his tie. Lucy Spencer from reception was also there, as well as other employees Catherine had seen during the past days. Louis Miller approached the cleaning staff. "You stay in the back. Serve coffee when asked, but don't interrupt. And stay quiet." Catherine and the other employees positioned themselves next to the service tables, practically invisible to the executives filling the room. At exactly 2 p.m., the main doors opened and David Martinez entered the room. His presence immediately changed the atmosphere. Murmurs ceased, postures straightened, smiles appeared automatically. "Good afternoon," David said with a firm voice. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "No problem, Mr. Martinez," Robert Lewis responded with his best executive smile. "We're here for whatever you need." David walked toward the front of the room, where there was a giant screen. His eyes swept the room, stopping briefly in the section where his mother was. Catherine felt a knot in her stomach. "Today we're going to talk about organizational culture," David began. "About values, about respect, about what it really means to work at Altiora Global." The attendees nodded, expecting the typical corporate speech about excellence and teamwork. "But before talking about values," David continued, "I want to show you something." The screen lit up. Images from the building's security cameras appeared. Date: 3 days ago. "During the last 3 days, we've been observing very closely the interactions between our employees and the cleaning staff." A murmur of nervousness ran through the room. Some employees exchanged worried glances. "Observe this first scene," David said, pointing to the screen. On the screen appeared Louis Miller talking to Catherine on the first day. His voice was clearly audible. "I hope you can keep up with the pace. We don't keep anyone here who's not useful. And I don't want to hear complaints that you can't handle the work because of your age." Louis paled. Robert Lewis looked at the screen with growing discomfort. "Let's continue," David said with a dangerously calm voice. The next scene showed the accounting department employees mocking Catherine. Their voices resonated in the deadly silence of the room. "Did you see the new cleaning lady? She looks like she already has one foot in the grave." The recorded laughter contrasted brutally with the current silence. "Do you find this funny now?" David asked. No one responded. Faces had turned red with shame. The third scene showed Robert Lewis from the previous day. We don't want them to misinterpret our quality standards. Robert sank into his chair. He knew he was finished. And my personal favorite, David said with sarcasm as the elevator scene appeared. The comments about service staff and smells resonated in the room like whips. When the recordings ended, the silence was total. No one dared to breathe loudly. 37, David said suddenly. Excuse me? Someone asked. 37 incidents of discrimination, disrespect, or cruelty toward cleaning staff in just 3 days. 37. David walked slowly through the room, looking at each person present. Do you know who that woman you've been humiliating for 3 days is? Everyone's eyes automatically turned toward the section where the cleaning staff was. Catherine felt her heart racing. That woman, David said with a voice trembling with contained emotion, is Catherine Martinez, my mother. The impact was immediate. Muffled gasps, horrified faces, bodies sinking into chairs. Robert Lewis looked like he was going to faint. My mother, David continued, who worked in cleaning for years to pay for my studies, who taught me that honest work has no social class, who sacrificed everything so I could be standing here today running this company. Catherine felt tears running down her cheeks, not from humiliation this time, but from pride. Her son hadn't forgotten where he came from. For 3 days, David continued, you showed who you really are when you think no one is watching. You showed that all our speeches about inclusion and respect are just empty words. Louis Miller tried to speak. Mr. Martinez, I didn't know that. That she was my mother. David interrupted him. Was that the difference? Would you have been respectful if you had known who she was? Louis fell silent. The problem isn't that you didn't know who she was. The problem is that for you, a 63-year-old woman who cleans offices doesn't deserve basic respect, doesn't deserve to be treated like a human being. David walked toward where his mother was. Catherine approached slowly, walking among the stunned stares of the employees who had despised her for days. Ladies and gentlemen, David said when his mother reached his side, let me introduce Catherine Martinez, former cleaning worker, single mother, working woman. Also business administration graduate from UCLA, independent small business consultant, and the person who taught me everything I know about real leadership. More gasps of surprise. Catherine wasn't just an older woman who needed to work. She was a professional, an entrepreneur, a woman with education and experience. But that shouldn't matter either, David continued, because respect shouldn't be earned with titles or family connections. It should be given simply for being human. Robert Lewis attempted a desperate apology. Mr. Martinez, I never meant to disrespect her. If I had known... Robert, David interrupted him with an icy voice. You didn't just disrespect my mother. You created an environment where other employees felt entitled to humiliate a working woman. Your behavior was systematic, cruel, and completely unacceptable. He addressed the entire room. Starting tomorrow, Robert Lewis will no longer work at Altiora Global. His dismissal is effective immediately. Robert stood up, staggering. Mr. Martinez, please. I have a family, I have expenses. You should have thought about that before humiliating mine. Louis Miller had also begun to tremble. He knew his turn was coming. Louis, David said, your behavior as a supervisor has been abusive, discriminatory, and incompetent. You're also fired effective immediately. But I was just following orders, Louis protested. Orders from whom? Who ordered you to yell at an employee for breaking a cup? Who ordered you to threaten Martha for defending a coworker? Louis had no answer. David continued addressing the entire room. The rest of you have a second chance, but I want it to be absolutely clear. Respect toward all employees, regardless of their position, age, or function, is not optional in this company. It's mandatory. Starting tomorrow, we'll implement a complete respect in the workplace awareness program. There will be mandatory training, periodic evaluations, and zero tolerance for any form of discrimination. Additionally, he added, looking directly at the employees who had appeared in the recordings, Each of you will write a personal apology to my mother and all the cleaning staff, and not an empty corporate apology. I want you to reflect on what you did and why it was wrong." The room remained in deadly silence. No one dared to move. "And I want you to know," David continued, "that my mother doesn't need this job. She came here because I asked her to evaluate our organizational culture. Because I wanted to know if the company I've built was a place where people like her, people who gave me everything, would be treated with dignity." He looked around the room with eyes that shone with emotion. "Clearly, we failed that test, but we're going to change that. Because a company that doesn't respect all its employees doesn't deserve to exist." David turned to his mother. "Mom, would you like to say something?" Catherine approached the microphone. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft but full of dignity. "For 3 days," she began, "you saw me as you wanted to see me. As an older woman, poor, uneducated, worthless. You didn't take even a second to know me as a person." Her voice became firmer. "But I did get to know you. I saw your true values when you thought no one important was watching." She looked directly at Robert, who was now crying. "Respect isn't demanded with power," she said with a clear voice. "It's earned through example." Then she looked at the entire room. "I hope this experience teaches you that every person who works here, from the CEO to the person who empties the trash cans, deserves to be treated with basic human dignity. Because at the end of the day," she concluded, "we're all simply people trying to do our job the best we can." The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of fear, but the silence of deep reflection. David took the microphone again. "This meeting ends here. Robert and Louis, I ask you to collect your things and leave the building. The rest, reflect on what you've seen and heard today. And remember, at Altiora Global, we treat all people with respect. No exceptions." As employees left the room in silence, some with tears in their eyes, others with their heads down in shame, no one could imagine how this revelation would change not only their professional lives, but their way of seeing the world. Because sometimes you need a cruel mirror to see who you really are. A week after the meeting that changed everything at Altiora Global, the building breathed differently. It wasn't just imagination. There was a palpable change in the way people interacted with each other. Catherine had returned, but this time not as an undercover cleaning employee, but as an official organizational culture consultant. Her temporary office was on the 28th floor, with a view of the entire city of Los Angeles. From her window, she could see employees arriving every morning. Some walked with their heads down, still processing the shame of having been exposed. Others showed a new awareness in their interactions with staff from different levels. The first visible change had been immediate. All employees, without exception, now greeted the cleaning staff. It wasn't forced courtesy. After a few days, it had become natural. The good mornings echoed through the hallways in a way that had never happened before. Martha had been promoted to supervisor of the cleaning department, replacing Louis Miller. Her first action was to implement a system where any cleaning employee could directly report any incident of disrespect without fear of retaliation. "It's strange," Martha confided to Catherine during lunch in the fifth-floor cafeteria. "After 5 years of being invisible, now people look me in the eyes when they talk to me." Catherine smiled, but knew that real change would take time. Deep habits don't transform overnight. In the accounting department, the employees who had been recorded mocking Catherine had requested a meeting with her. They arrived nervous, with prepared apologies and expressions of genuine remorse. Mrs. Martinez, Patricia Hernandez, the accountant who had made the cruelest comments, had said, "I have no excuse for what I said. I grew up in a family where my grandmother worked her whole life in other people's houses, and I admired her so much. I don't know why I acted so differently here." Catherine had listened to each apology with patience. Some were clearly rehearsed, empty words said out of fear. But others, like Patricia's, came from the heart. They came from people who had genuinely seen themselves reflected in a mirror and hadn't liked what they found. Forgiveness is a process. Catherine had responded. But real change is demonstrated with actions, not words. The most complex case was Lucy Spencer, the receptionist. After Robert Lewis's dismissal, she had temporarily assumed some of his administrative responsibilities, but her behavior toward the cleaning staff had been documented in the recordings. One afternoon, Lucy approached Catherine with red eyes from crying. "Mrs. Martinez," she said with a broken voice, "I know I have no right to ask you this, but can I tell you why I acted that way?" Catherine nodded, inviting her to sit in her office. "My family is from a small town in the Central Valley," Lucy began. "My mom worked in rich people's houses her whole life. I studied communications because I wanted to get out of that life. I wanted them to respect me for my education, not see me like my mom." Tears ran down her cheeks. "When you arrived, dressed as a cleaning employee, you reminded me so much of my mom that I despaired, like you were a mirror of what I didn't want to be. And instead of feeling pride for my mom's work, I felt shame." Catherine listened in silence. She recognized in Lucy so many people who had grown up in working families and who, when ascending socially, developed convenient amnesia about their origins. "Do you know what's the saddest part of your story?" Catherine asked her gently. "That your mother worked her whole life so you could have opportunities, but you've turned her sacrifice into a source of shame instead of pride." Lucy sobbed harder. "Respect doesn't come from the job you do," Catherine continued. "It comes from how you treat people. Your mother deserves your admiration, not your denial." "How can I fix this?" Lucy asked. "Start by calling your mother and telling her you're proud of her." 3 days later, Lucy arrived at the office with a new photo on her desk. Her and her mother, hugging, smiling. She had begun telling her colleagues about her mother's work with genuine pride. The training program implemented by David had begun with all hierarchical levels. But they weren't typical corporate presentations about diversity and inclusion. They were deep sessions about empathy, respect, and human dignity. Catherine had insisted that the training include real stories. Cleaning staff employees shared their experiences, their dreams, their struggles. Executives listened without being able to hide behind their titles or salaries. In one of those sessions, Rose, the petite cleaning employee, had told her story. Single mother of 3 children, studying nursing online at night, working to pay for her oldest son's engineering studies. "When you see me cleaning bathrooms," she had said with a firm voice, "you don't just see a woman who needs the job. You see a mother who is building her children's future. You see a student who doesn't give up. You see a person with dreams and goals." The silence in that room had been different from the Revelation meeting. It was a silence of respect, understanding, rediscovered humanity. Andrea, the young intern who had been kind to Catherine from the first day, had been publicly recognized by David. Her small gesture of respect toward a stranger had demonstrated more leadership than many executives with years of experience. Real leadership, David had said during a general meeting, isn't about directing people who are below you on the org chart. It's about treating all people with dignity, no matter where they are. Andrea had been promoted to Organizational Culture Coordinator, working directly with Catherine on implementing new respect protocols. But not all changes had been easy. Some employees had voluntarily resigned, uncomfortable with the new culture of accountability and respect. They preferred to seek environments where they could continue exercising small powers over others. "It's normal," Catherine had explained to David during one of their weekly meetings. "When you change an organizational culture, you lose people who benefited from the previous system, but you gain employees who truly share the values you want to promote." Robert Lewis's replacement had been carefully selected. Carmen Valdez, the new senior operations manager, had worked for years in non-profit organizations before entering the corporate sector. Her experience with vulnerable populations had taught her that respect and dignity weren't luxuries, but basic necessities in any work environment. In her first meeting with the team, Carmen had established clear rules. "In this department, we measure success not only by the numbers we achieve, but by how we treat people in the process. A month after the revelation, Catherine organized a special meeting with all the cleaning staff. She wanted to hear directly from them how they felt about the changes. "It's like we had been living in black and white, and now we see colors," Hope had said. The employee who had previously advised Catherine to become insensitive to survive. "I no longer have to pretend I don't hear cruel comments," Martha added, "because there aren't any anymore." But the deepest transformation had occurred in a private conversation between Catherine and David. "Do you know what was the hardest part of those 3 days?" Catherine had asked her son while they walked through the park where she used to have lunch. "The humiliations?" David asked. "No. The hardest part was realizing that I had raised a CEO who had created an environment where those humiliations were possible." David stopped, feeling like he had been punched. "Not because you're cruel," Catherine continued, "but because sometimes, when we climb too high, we lose sight of what happens on the ground." "You're right," David admitted. "I was so focused on numbers, on growth, on competition, that I forgot that a company is, above all, a group of people." "But you learned," Catherine said with pride. "And more importantly, you acted. Many leaders stay in indignation. You took action." 3 months later, Altiora Global had implemented a pilot program that other companies began to study. The Human Dignity Protocol included regular organizational culture evaluations, anonymous reporting channels, and a system where respect toward all employees was part of managers' performance evaluations. But the most important indicator of change wasn't in any official report. It was in the hallways, in the elevators, in the cafeteria. It was in conversations where employees of different levels treated each other as people, not as positions on an org chart. It was in Martha's genuine smile when she arrived at work each morning. It was in the photo Lucy had put on her desk. It was in the way Andrea continued greeting each cleaning employee by name. And it was in Catherine's eyes when she saw her son leading meetings where the first question wasn't, "How does this affect our profits?" but "How does this affect our people?" The change had begun with a painful revelation, but had blossomed into something beautiful. A company where every person, regardless of their job, age, or background, was treated with the dignity they deserved simply for being human. The garden at Altiora Global's new headquarters in Los Angeles buzzed with activity. It was the 5th anniversary of the implementation of the Human Dignity Protocol, and employees from all levels had gathered for the annual celebration. Catherine, now 68 years old, walked slowly among the tables under the jacaranda trees they had planted in honor of all the company's employees. Her hair was completely white, but her eyes maintained the same spark of wisdom and determination. She stopped in front of a bronze plaque embedded in a natural stone wall. It read, "Respect isn't demanded with power. It's earned through example. Catherine Martinez, 2025. Grandma Kathy, did you write that sentence?" Catherine turned toward the little voice. It was Sophia, 6 years old, Andrea's daughter, who was now the company's director of organizational culture. "Yes, little one," Catherine replied, crouching down to the girl's level. "Do you know what it means?" Sophia frowned, concentrating. "That being good to people is more important than being in charge?" Catherine smiled. "Exactly." A few feet away, Andrea watched the scene with affection. At 27 years old, she had grown professionally in a transformed company where respect wasn't just a policy, but a way of life. "Mrs. Martinez," a young man in a maintenance uniform approached. "I wanted to thank you again. Thanks to the study scholarships you implemented, I was able to finish my business administration degree. Next month, I start as an analyst in the operations department." Catherine recognized Miguel, who had started in cleaning 3 years ago. The internal professional development program had allowed more than 50 employees from different areas to advance in their careers, regardless of where they had started. "Never forget where you come from," Catherine told him with a smile. "And always remember to treat people like you'd want them to treat your family." Miguel nodded with tears in his eyes. "I'll never forget, Mrs. Martinez." Near the garden's central fountain, Martha was leading a group of new employees in their first week of orientation. She was no longer just a cleaning supervisor. Now she was an integration mentor for all new employees, regardless of their department. The most important rule here, she told the newcomers, is simple. Treat every person like they were your mother, your sister, your child, because to someone they are. Lucy Spencer, now Human Resources Manager, approached Catherine with an older woman by her side. "Mrs. Martinez, I want you to meet my mom, Hope Spencer." The older woman, dressed in a beautiful navy blue dress, extended her hands toward Catherine. "You're the lady who changed my daughter," she said with an emotional voice. "Lucy has told me everything. Before meeting you, she was ashamed of me. Now she brags that her mom worked her whole life to give her opportunities." Catherine took Hope's hands. They were working hands, like hers. Hands that told stories of sacrifice and unconditional love. "Your daughter learned something we all need to remember," Catherine told her. "That honest work, no matter what it is always a source of pride." On the main stage, David prepared to give the annual speech. At 41 years old, he had matured not only as an entrepreneur, but as a human leader. Altiora Global had grown exponentially in the last 5 years, but more importantly, it had become a model of organizational culture that companies worldwide came to study. 5 years ago, David began before the hundreds of gathered employees. "I discovered that being successful in business meant nothing if we weren't successful as human beings." His gaze found his mother in the crowd. "A wise woman taught me that true leadership isn't measured by the size of your office or your salary. It's measured by how you treat people when you think no one is watching." The applause was thunderous, but Catherine noticed something more in the ovation. It wasn't just polite applause for the boss. It was genuine respect, real admiration for a leader who had demonstrated through actions that people matter more than profits. "Today I want to announce something special," David continued. "Starting next year, we'll implement the Invisible Leaders program in all our international offices." The crowd fell silent, expectant. Executives and directors from all levels will work for 1 week in different roles within the company, not as undercover investigation, but as part of their leadership development. Because you can't lead people whose reality you don't understand. This time, the applause came accompanied by murmurs of approval. It was a revolutionary idea, but perfectly coherent with the culture they had built. "And all of this," David concluded, "began because a 63-year-old woman had the courage to show me a mirror I didn't want to see." He got off the stage and walked directly toward his mother. In front of everyone, he hugged her with the same tenderness with which she had hugged him when he was a child and came home sad from school. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered in her ear, "for teaching me that success without humanity isn't success." Catherine felt her heart fill with deep satisfaction, not just from maternal pride, but from knowing that her painful experience had served to create something beautiful and lasting. As the celebration continued, Rose approached Catherine. She was now a licensed nurse and worked part-time at the company clinic, but still came to all the meetings of the staff she had known when working in cleaning. "Mrs. Martinez," she said with a radiant smile, "my son graduated as an engineer last month. And do you know what he said in his graduation speech?" Catherine shook her head, smiling. He said, "I dedicate this degree to my mother, who taught me that there's no small job when it's done with dignity, and to Mrs. Catherine Martinez, who showed the world that respect has no hierarchies." Tears ran down Catherine's cheeks. These were the true measures of success. Transformed lives, restored dignities, broken barriers. At sunset, when most employees had already left, Catherine sat alone on a bench under the largest jacaranda tree in the garden. The purple flowers fell gently, creating a natural carpet at her feet. She closed her eyes and breathed the fresh Los Angeles air. In her mind, she relived the 3 days that had changed everything. The moments of humiliation, the cruel words, the forced invisibility. But she also remembered the revelation, the genuine apologies, the real transformations. What are you thinking about? David's voice pulled her from her memories. About the price of change, she responded without opening her eyes. And what's worth paying? David sat beside her. Do you regret going through all that? Catherine opened her eyes and looked around the garden. Employees from different departments were cleaning up together after the celebration, laughing, talking as equals. Martha was directing the effort with the natural authority of someone who had earned genuine respect. Andrea was playing with her daughter while her husband, who worked in accounting, helped fold chairs. Regret? Catherine asked with a smile. Son, if I had to do it 1,000 times to achieve this, I would. She stood up slowly, and her son helped her walk toward the parking lot. Do you know what's the most beautiful thing about all this? She asked him as they walked. What? That I'm no longer the only one who believes all people deserve respect. Now we're hundreds. And those hundreds will become thousands. And those thousands will become a generation that can't conceive the world any other way. They reached David's car. Before getting in, Catherine turned one last time toward the Altiora Global building. The office lights created a golden pattern against the purple evening sky. In one of those windows on the 30th floor, Carmen Valdez was now working, having stayed late preparing an exchange program with companies from other countries that wanted to learn about the Human Dignity Protocol. On the 25th floor, Andrea's team was working on a documentary about organizational transformation that would premiere at universities throughout California. On the 15th floor, Miguel, the former cleaning employee who was now an analyst, was reviewing proposals to make the company's products more accessible to working families. And on the 5th floor, the cafeteria where Catherine had lunched alone 3 years ago now had communal tables where executives and cleaning staff shared the same space, the same conversations, the same humanity. Silence also hurts, Catherine murmured, remembering the words she had said during the confrontation. What did you say? David asked. Nothing, son. I was just remembering that sometimes the most important things are said when we can no longer stay silent. As the car drove away from the building, Catherine thought about all the women like her who continued to be invisible in offices, factories, hospitals, and shopping centers around the world. Women who cleaned, cooked, cared for, served, and who deserved to be seen, respected, valued. Her story had ended with justice and transformation. But she knew there were millions of similar stories still waiting for their moment of revelation. Change, she told herself as she watched the city lights, always begins with one person who decides they can no longer accept the unacceptable. A jacaranda flower had stuck to the car window. Bright purple, delicate but resistant. Like human dignity. Beautiful, fragile, but impossible to completely destroy. Catherine smiled. Tomorrow would be another day. And there would be new opportunities to remind the world that all people, absolutely all, deserve respect. Because in the end, that was the most important lesson. It's not about what job you do, but how you treat people while doing it. And that lesson, planted in the heart of a company in Los Angeles, had taken root that would extend far beyond what anyone could imagine. We thought she was just a cleaning lady, but she was worth more than all of us combined. This story isn't just fiction. In offices, restaurants, shopping centers, and buildings around the world, there are people who work day after day being treated as invisible, people with stories, dreams, families, and dignity who deserve our respect. Real change begins when we decide to see each person as what they really are, a valuable human being, regardless of their job, age, or social position. Because everyone, absolutely everyone, is very important to someone else. If this story touched your heart, subscribe, give it a like, and tell us from which country you're watching us. Share this story to remind the world that respect has no hierarchies.